Hi, and welcome back to That Was the Week That Was, week 23 of 2023. And I'm back with Vince McLeod to review the events of the last week with reference to the perception of the alternative centre. Hey Vince, how are you this week?
G'day Bob, I'm freezing at the moment. It's very cold here in Nelson. Winter is now definitely upon us.
Gosh, yes, and it's getting dark. Well, let's just jump straight into it. We'll start off in Russia again, and let's talk about the collapsing dam. Apparently, Ukraine has accused the Russian forces of blowing up the dam, and the Russian officials have blamed Ukrainian bombardments. How likely is it that the Russians blew up their own dam?
It's very possible. I think if we want to know who was responsible for it, we have to guess who would benefit the most. Now, I'd suggest that with the Ukraine just about to launch a counter-offensive, or at least they've done so in recent days, I think that the Russians would be the major beneficiaries of flooding the whole area, but perhaps not, because some have said that the floods have washed away a lot of the minefields, so have made it easier to progress over the terrain. So I think this incident is another one that's inside the fog of war, and we won't really know for a long time who was responsible.
Strange. Well, the article also makes the strange comment that it is not possible to reconcile the conflicting claims. So the offensive has begun and the war really is in full swing, isn't it?
I think the war's in full swing now, especially when you see that certain Eastern European countries are talking about putting troops in Ukraine on the Ukrainian side and going into combat against the Russians. So I think things are really escalating a lot. I think this Ukrainian counteroffensive has put things up another level again, and we're just going to have to see in the coming weeks if things intensify even further.
We mentioned in a recent show that the US has managed to escape recession, but this week we learned that Europe has not been so lucky. An article in Zero Hedge says that the Eurozone economy was in a technical recession for the first 3 months of 2023. This is not a surprise to anyone, is it?
It's not a big surprise, especially to those who are aware that the world's economies haven't really rebounded from the COVID lockdowns yet. And it's not sure if they're going to anytime soon on account of the high interest rates, which are making it a lot harder for people to find money to spend and buy things with. So I think we're going to see an extended slow growth, low GDP growth, perhaps even negative growth, not only for the Eurozone, but also for America, Japan, and in the worst case scenario, even China. And if China was growing slowly or even went backwards, then I think we'd see the world really hit an economic slow period.
Well, the same article says that there are no signs that inflation has peaked yet. So I'm guessing that the hard times are continuing. What should we expect for the next 6 months of the year? Are we going to get more of the same?
We have to expect more high inflation, but there are a few signs that they're going to continue to put the interest rates up. Many commentators have said that it's about as high as it can realistically go without destroying a large amount of the mortgagee market. And I think that we're going to just see inflation will hold steady for a while still, for probably 6 to 12 months at least, and they'll keep the interest rates at a similar level for 6 to 12 months at least. And then if inflation has started to go down appreciably, then I think only then can we look forward to lowering the interest rates. They're not going to lower them at all as long as inflation's still above about 5 or 6%.
We've also learned that the Japanese have doubled their defense budget to deter threats from China and North Korea. And last week, New Zealand signed a commitment to cooperate with Japan. The lines for war are being drawn, aren't they?
Most concerning for me was the news that China has just bought 15,000 drones from the Iranians. I think that's a sign that they're definitely getting ready for potential war over Taiwan. Many are saying that from the Chinese perspective, it's it's the Russians being tied down in Ukraine, and Europe and America being tied down in Ukraine to some extent creates the perfect opportunity for China to go to war over Taiwan. So that's a very real possibility for us over the next few years.
Is it inevitable, Vince? What do you think the chances are of a war in the Pacific?
They're extremely high because the Chinese are rising to such an extent that they will soon naturally be the predominant power just from their sheer economic bulk. The Chinese GDP is already roughly the same size as the American one, and they've got a lot more potential for growth still because their economy is not totally maxed out. If they would get as much GDP per person as the Americans have, then the Chinese economy would be over 3 times bigger because of their population. And there's no reason why that shouldn't happen, because the average Chinese IQ is about 104, 105, which is higher than the average American IQ. So there's every reason to think that they could potentially become 3 times more powerful than America in the next 20 years, which means that from the American perspective, if they are going to attack China like the Western powers attacked Germany in 1939, then the time to strike would be very soon.
Well, back in New Zealand, Luxon's making waves again. Last week, he said that people should be having more babies. Is he right?
He is right from the point of view that a population decrease for us in New Zealand will put a lot of pressure on the ability to pay pensions because we don't have a lot of workers per dependent anymore. Like if you go back to the 1960s, there were 4 or 5 workers per dependent, and now it's getting closer to 2 workers per dependent or even less. So someone is going to have to work to pay for all these boomers we've got. And what we've learned is that that probably isn't going to be immigrants, because the immigrants that we take in tend to either not work or they tend to shoot through to Australia for better wages. So we're really kind of responsible for creating our own future generations of workers.
Well, Luxon also raised eyebrows by saying that we should have warrantless searches to prevent gun crime. That's way out there. What reaction do you expect from the public on this, Vince?
To my mind, that's extremely bad news that he wants to suggest even further crackdowns on laws. Police have already got almost the ability to make warrantless searches under the Search and Surveillance Act that John Key brought in, but this would make things even worse. In this case, under Luxon's proposal, they'd just have to basically want to target you, and they'd be able to turn your entire house over, go through everything just at any time. So that's a highly authoritarian move from my point of view. And I expect that the New Zealand public will just roll over like tickled puppies and do absolutely nothing about it, unfortunately.
Well, to end, we're going back to the Russian war, but this time via Radio New Zealand, where a rogue employee allegedly doctored a Reuters report with Russian propaganda. How do you think he got away with it?
I think he got away with it because the media doesn't really have any sub-editors anymore, and so they don't have a person who reviews the draft copy for things like spelling errors. That's why there's so many spelling errors in the mainstream media, grammatical errors, and last-minute additions by propagandists. So it's just really they do everything on the cheap, and that's why there's no oversight when it comes to these sort of things.
So do you think that it is justified that he lose his job because of it? Was it a prank, or do you think it was a serious thing?
It's hard to say for now from today's perspective, but it seems to me that this person could well have been a foreign intelligence asset of some kind trying to shift the propaganda narrative in favor of Russia. In such a case, you can't really trust such a person on your workforce, but they could be taking money from somebody for all we know, and that really means they're not a trustworthy colleague, and you couldn't trust them to put out truthful material. However, you can also say that one person's propaganda is another person's truth, and it's not really clear if what they said was. It's not really clear that what they wrote was wrong. It's just kind of slanted in a pro-Russian sense. And since the Western world is doing the pro-Ukraine thing, it seems like we're allowing enemy propaganda to slip through, and I think that's why people were so upset. But we'll have to see what happens. It's also been known for a long time, since at least Operation Mockingbird, that there are many intelligence assets working in the mainstream media anyway. So if Russia has won, they're outnumbered by hundreds for the number of intelligence assets that the West will have in the mainstream media in New Zealand.
Wow, how interesting. I wonder if heads will roll, or if head will roll. So it seems that last week was war, espionage, and propaganda. What a week that was.
It's getting very exciting. I think we're going to see things will continue to build up, tensions will continue to increase, and people will continue to die. I think things are really in a state of chaos at the moment, but they could potentially become worse. So stay tuned for next week.
The alt centre are clown world's good guys. They don't fit into boxes neatly enough to be someone else's tools.